Hey, welcome back to the Next Gen podcast. I'm Jeff Baxter. I'm your host. And if you did not watch or listen to the last podcast with Ken Allen, please be sure to do so, because I'm going to talk about one of the things that we talked about in that last episode that I think is so important for us coming alongside the next generation. And if, just as a reminder, the first episode each month is with an expert in the next gen field. Could be in kids ministry, middle school, high school, young adults, could be a parenting expert. And then the second part of the month is I'm going to do a little bit of teaching on something we talked about in that first interview of the month, that first episode. So be sure to check out the first month's episode and then tune into the second one in that order. And by the way, if this is helpful for you, be sure to subscribe to the Next Gen podcast if it's helpful, and be sure to share it with others, because we want to come alongside parents, teachers, coaches, church staff, mentors, to come alongside the next generation to help them faithfully follow Jesus for a lifetime. That's our goal here, and so that's what we're up to. So one of the topics that Ken and I talked about, which we really leaned into the last time around for a period of time, was to have real, genuine relationships with the next generation. Our kids really long for and are starving for real relationships with real people. They really are. I know. They look at you sometimes and they think you're an idiot. If you're a parent, you understand what I'm saying. If you're a coach sometimes, or a teacher. But the reality is they are hungry for, and they desire, and they need real time, real people, in-person relationships. I know in the smartphone world and in the post-COVID Zoom call world, in the educational system, kids now need more than ever real relationships, real mentors, not just texting relationships or social media relationships or influencing relationships, but they need real relationships. So sometimes our kids don't give off that vibe, but trust me, they need it, and they really want real-time mentoring relationships with people. And it doesn't matter what your role is. It doesn't matter if you come alongside with kids, you're a youth worker, you're a kids worker, a parent, teacher, coach, mentor. It doesn't matter. Your presence matters in the lives of the next generation. So listen to this. Jesus was our greatest example. Jesus got lots of things done. Of course he did. He checked off his to-do list. He did it. He healed people. He got off and prayed alone with his Father. He did a number of things on his own and to get things done. But he was present in the lives of his disciples, especially the 12 disciples. He did life with them. He mentored them. There are no cell phones. There were no phone calls. There was life-on-life ministry happening with Jesus and the disciples. In fact, because all of the walking that Jesus and the disciples did that we don't have recorded in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, he would go from the coast of the Mediterranean Sea to Jerusalem, to Galilee, and all around. And can you imagine the conversations that Jesus had with all those disciples? I mean, we don't have it all recorded, but they spent most of their time doing life-on-life, in-person ministry conversations. So Jesus would talk to them, taught them, answered their questions. Jesus was present. And even after Jesus rose from the dead, watch this. This is amazing. He appeared. He was present with his disciples. I love this. Listen to what Luke chapter 24, verses 36 through 49 says about this. While they were still talking about this, that is, that Jesus was crucified and died, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." Can you imagine? He's just risen from the dead, and he pops into the room, and they're scared to death, and he says, "Peace be with you." That wasn't the first time Jesus said, don't be afraid or be peaceful. Peace be with you. They were startled and frightened, thinking they saw a ghost. You and I probably would too. He said to them, "Why are you troubled? Why do you doubt that I've risen? And why do you have doubts in your minds? Look at my hands and my feet. It is myself. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you can see I have." When they had said this, he showed them his hands and feet. And while they were still did not get it, believe it, because of joy and amazement, he said to them, "Do you have anything here to eat?" And they gave him a piece of boiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. He was present with them, and he took and ate food in his resurrected body. That's amazing. He said to them, "This is what I told you while I was still with you. Everything must be fulfilled that is written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms." Then he opened their minds so they could understand the scriptures. I would have loved that, for Jesus to open our minds to understand the scriptures. And by the way, he could do it every single day through the power of the Holy Spirit in your life. Verse 46, he told them, "This is what I've written. The Messiah will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day, and repentance for the forgiveness of sins will be preached in his name to all the nations, beginning at Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things. I'm going to send you what my Father has promised, but stay in the city until you have been clothed by power on high." And then after the resurrection, Jesus showed up. He'd been with them before the resurrection. He'd hung out with them. He'd walked with them, talked with them everywhere he went. And after he rose from the dead, he did the same thing for 40 days. He showed up and was present, alive, teaching them. Friends, we need to be present with the next generation, and Jesus is our greatest example about this. He was present with them even after the resurrection. It's incredible. You read John chapter 21, and you see that Jesus showed up on the beach with Peter, and the guys were fishing, and the miraculous catch of fish happened a second time, and then he had breakfast with Peter on the beach, and he was present with Peter. Well, let me give you some ideas and some tips around this whole idea of being fully present, genuinely present with the next generation, whether it's your own child, whether it's somebody you know, whether you're mentoring somebody, you're in youth ministry or kids ministry or young adult ministry. Be present with them. So you might want to push pause, grab a piece of paper or pen, take some notes here, because I want you to write down these things. Just a few things to think about. Number one, be a student of your child or student or athlete. As a parent, you might push back and think, well, be a student of my child. Of course I'm a student of my child. And you might get a little defensive with me right now in this podcast, and you might think to yourself, of course I know my own kid. Of course I know them. I'm a student of them. I birthed them and brought them into the world, of course. But wait a minute. Your relationship with your child is going to change over time. In relationships, there's always more to learn, especially as they grow up. Getting to know your child when they're 5 years old is much different than when they're 15, and much different when they're 22 years old. I'm the dad of 3 kids, and at the time of this podcast, they're 16, 21, and 24 years old, and their stages of life are very, very different right now, and I'm working really, really hard to be intentional in my relationship with all 3 of them, whether I'm spending time with them in a coffee shop, fishing with them, watching a movie, hiking, playing a board game with them. I want to learn about them because they're growing and they're changing and they're adapting and their personalities are coming out and their gifts and abilities. And so we need to be a student of our child or our student. Do the same as a teacher or a coach. Each child is wired differently with gifts, abilities, personality. Getting to know them builds trust and will help you understand them and have a relationship with them in the long run. Number 2, ask them questions that are not just yes and no answers. It's so easy when they come home from school and you say to them, "Hey, how was your day?" "Good." Or they don't say anything. They just give you that blank stare. But we need to lean in and do a better job of asking questions that require them to give a detailed response. Get them thinking. Don't ask them to provide them with easy answers, but ask in order to build a relationship with them. Jesus was so good at this. He's our example. Jesus asked his disciples and others hundreds of questions in the 4 Gospels, hundreds of questions. In Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, go dig it out, go look it up. Count the number of times Jesus asked questions. He did not answer his questions most of the time. And for those of us who are kind of strategic and more detailed and kind of want the answers to things, that could be very frustrating. And I'm one of those people. But Jesus Ask these questions to explore and get them to think and to build relationship with them. In the age of smartphones and Google searches, it's so easy to give quick answers, but not stop, pause, build relationship, be present with your child or your student or your athlete along the way. Number 3, when you're having these conversations or you're being present, put your cell phone away when you're having a conversation. Ask them to do the same. This is hard, and I'm not always good at it, to be honest with you. But just it's just a practical suggestion. To have purposeful conversations and to be fully present, you got to put your cell phone away, put it down, put it away, so you can have a conversation with them along the way. So number 4 is guide them toward growing with Jesus. Guide them with growing with Jesus. We want to help the next generation grow with Jesus. This means they are in relationship with Jesus because Jesus is present with them. Help them to be present with Jesus. They care what Jesus thinks about everything. They're getting to know him through Bible study and have conversations in prayer. They're gonna lean into him. That's what we want for them, at least. And when they're angry or happy or sad or frustrated or anxious or joyful, help them to be present with Jesus. And we have to be an example about that. More is caught than taught. So they're watching our lives to see if we're present with Jesus, because Jesus is present with us. As parents, you know that our relationship with our kids change over time. You might be the parent of a young child right now that's growing up. You might be a parent of a teenager. You might be the parent of a young adult listening to this right now. But we start out as sort of a Sherpa. We gather things, we collect things, we carry things, and we plot out the path of our kids ahead of us, kind of like a Sherpa does as they're going to hike, Mount Everest. The Sherpa goes ahead, lays out the ladders and the ropes and carries the gear and does all these things. And that's kind of what we do the first 10 or so years of their lives, is we're picking up their shoes and their laundry and their food left over. That's what we do. We're a Sherpa. Then about 10 years old, we switch a little bit over to a rabbi. We start to teach more intentionally, probably about following after Jesus and being wise with their friendships. And as they head into middle school, this is particularly important. Now, of course, along the way, there's a bit of an overlap. We're teaching our kids before they become 10 years old, but they're starting to get more responsible. They probably start having some chores around the house, and now you're starting to lean in and teach them bigger concepts about Jesus, the Bible, the Old Testament characters, I hope. And they're going to middle school ministry and then high school ministry and young adult ministry and learning about these things. And you're a rabbi along the way. Doesn't mean you have all the answers, but you're helping them find the answers as according to what God thinks about things. And then it shifts when they're about 18 to 20 years old. You become a sage. You're not going to believe it. If you have young children that never come to you and ask you questions, you're not going to believe this stage is going to happen. But trust me, because of the age of my own kids, I've watched it happen. You start to see them think of you more as a sage. You've got some advice. You've got some wisdom you can offer them as they grow up and get older. They head off to college. They start to mature. They fall in love. They might start to get married. And then they start coming back to you, asking advice about what they should do about certain things. And it's amazing. They're maturing, they're adulting, they're becoming on their own, but now they want to know about life's bigger wisdom. Let them come, let them ask their questions, let them ask you questions about that so you can grow in your relationship with them in your present. It's been a joy to watch my own kids start to circle back around to do this. It's been so much fun along the way. And I encourage you, all of this is so that you're present with your kid, with your student along the way so you can guide them. I want to tell you a quick story and then I'll end this podcast for today. But, the power of presence, the power of being with a student, sometimes, this has probably happened with your own child. This has happened with students that I've come alongside of in history as a youth pastor. It's come alongside my own kids, and I've watched it happen at my own church with our own staff and our own serve team that come alongside the next generation. So the story is, this happened not too long ago when this podcast is being recorded, but we had one of our staff members overseeing Next Gen Ministry sit down with a kid that was having a hard time. He was making some bad choices. He was using some bad language. He was texting some bad stuff. It was hard to come alongside of him. And this staff member asked him a simple question. He slowed down with him. He looked him in the eyes, sat across from him, chair to chair, leaned in, and he said to the student, "How are you doing?" Simple question. How are you doing? Just slowed it down. He spoke about that quickly. How are you doing? And this student, who was really hard on the outside and made some bad choices, just started crying. He just started crying because somebody was present and looked him in the eyes and just asked the question, "How are you doing?" And this kid broke down because he saw that he was loved, cared for, extended grace, but yet he was being leaned into and told, "Man, you can't keep doing what you're doing." And it was an amazing moment, teachable moment in the life of this student for our staff member to come alongside of him. Friends, this is what this is all about. Our kids are longing for, even though they look like on the outside they might not be, they're longing for someone to be present with them, to care for them in genuine, face-to-face, in-person, undistracted relationship. So I hope this has been helpful for you with these tips and tactics along the way. I hope the Next Gen podcast has been helpful for you. Thanks so much for tuning in this week. And until next week, when we hear another expert, I look forward to hearing from you. Feel free to leave comments along the way. Email me, Jeff Baxter at Mission Hills, and I look forward to hearing from you. And even if you have a suggestion about an expert you'd like to hear from, I love to interview them. Or you have some suggestions about the topics we cover on the Next Gen podcast, I'd love to hear that too. So thanks so much again. Take care. We'll see you next week. This podcast is hosted by me, Jeff Baxter, along with special guests who are experts in the industry. We're mixed and edited by Leopard Productions. Our senior producer is Colin McFarland. Our video director is Zach Anderson, and our digital and SEO specialist is Maddie Brower. The Next Gen podcast is part of a Mission Hills podcast network here at Littleton, Colorado. Thanks for listening.